Professor Dershowitz, thank you so much for making the time. Now, I'm curious to know what you make of this ICC application for warrants, especially as I know you believe that the ICC has no jurisdiction over Israel.
Well, no, it's not that they have no jurisdiction over Israel. That's one of the arguments, that Israel is not a signatory and the complaining entity is not a state. That's an issue on the side. The major issue is that the Treaty of Rome requires complementarity. That is, it forbids the ICC even to investigate a country that has a judiciary that is a viable judiciary that is, in fact, conducting investigations. And I know for a fact, because, I have seen the Israeli judiciary at work. I know some of the justices. The former Chief Justice Aaron Barak was one of my closest friends, regarded as one of the greatest jurists in the world, that Israel has a functioning judiciary that is in the process of investigating all the charges that the ICC is seeking to make. And so the ICC is exceeding its jurisdiction. It's the first time in the history of the ICC that it is claimed to or sought to issue warrants against leaders of a country that is a democratic country with an operating judiciary. It's interesting that at the same time, they haven't issued warrants, for example, against the leaders of Iran, which quite clearly engaged in war crimes by sending hundreds of missiles at civilian targets in Israel just a few weeks ago. And they haven't issued warrants against many of the other countries that have no real judiciary. We know that in Iran, they just execute people willy-nilly. Just this weekend, they've executed dissidents and others. They have no real judiciary. And many of the other countries in the Middle East have no real judiciaries. Israel is the shining light of judiciaries everywhere in the Middle East. And to have Israel in some way analogized to or compared to a terrorist group like Hamas really undercuts the credibility of the ICC.
So, Professor, then, irrespective of the specific jurisdiction of the ICC, what mechanism would you recommend if there was to be some question about accountability, whether it be on the side of Hamas or the side of Israel, some kind of accountability for the leadership for any actions taken? What would be the mechanism, in your opinion?
Well, it's perfectly appropriate to go after Hamas if the ICC claims jurisdiction over non-states and non-members, because they have no judiciary. There is no conceivable claim of complementarity. But as far as Israel is concerned, they ought to send investigators to investigate one thing, that is whether Israel has a viable judiciary and whether the judiciary can investigate and will investigate the charges the ICC is making. The ICC has the power to investigate and issue warrants only if they conclude that Israel is incapable or unwilling to conduct this investigation. The various countries that signed on to the Rome Treaty, the United States did not and Israel did not, but the countries that did it on the assumption that if they're a democracy, they wouldn't have their leaders investigated by an outside court. They would have their leaders investigated first by their own courts. If for some reason the ICC then thinks that the investigation done domestically was inadequate, only then could they initiate their own investigation. But that hasn't happened. The ICC has not made a determination, nor could it, that Israel lacks the capacity to investigate allegations made by the ICC. So the ICC is already beyond its jurisdiction by seeking warrants without doing their due diligence investigation as to Israel's own investigations.
So if we look at the ongoing situation with Israel and its campaign against Hamas in Gaza, the ongoing situation with the hostages, it's a very kind of volatile situation. Would there be any prospect of any kind of internal Israeli jurisdiction looking into the actions?
Yes, already Israel is investigating. They have a whole group that is involved in evaluating and investigating every aspect, both of what happened on October 7th and what happened after October 7th. Israel has investigated every one of its wars. After the 1973 war, there was a massive investigation, which resulted in obviously some prosecutions of individual soldiers. In the Lebanon wars, there have been investigations. Virtually every time that Israel engages in any kind of kinetic activities of a serious sort, it's followed by investigations. In fact, usually they produce books, investigative books. I've read the books. They publish them both in Hebrew and in English, and they're available to the international community. And I would advise the International Criminal Court to look at the investigation that was done at Shatila and Sabra, the investigation that was done when the Turkish boat was attacked, the investigation that was done after the 1973 war. And you can be sure that there is an ongoing investigation now of everything that occurred between October 7th, 2023 and today.
So with regards to the ICC, you've explained your reasoning for why Israel is wrongly perhaps targeted by the ICC. Were you surprised that Hamas was also included in the application for warrants?
No, I was very disappointed by that, because what they do is try to create a moral equivalence between a terrorist group with no judiciary and a democratic country that is acting in self-defense. You know, maybe people can argue they're overreacting. Maybe people can argue that there have been some excessive civilian deaths, but those will all be investigated. Hamas targets civilians. When they killed 1,200, now it appears more than 1,200, mostly civilians, they targeted babies. They targeted innocent women and the elderly. That was their goal. Well, Israel, on the other hand, targets Hamas and does inevitably kill some innocent civilians, many of whom are used as human shields to protect Hamas leaders. We know that Sinwar is hiding with human shields in the tunnels. So to make a comparison between a democracy like Israel or the United States, which had more civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan than Israel has, or Great Britain or France, to make a comparison between democratic countries which have the capacity and the willingness to investigate themselves and Hamas that glorifies the killing of civilians, undercuts the authority and the credibility of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court is a very important institution, and it's important that it preserve its credibility. I've been in touch with people in the prosecutor's office making the case as an interested outside citizen, not a citizen of Israel, citizen of the United States, but one who cares deeply about that. I've made my concerns known to people in the prosecutor's office, particularly about complementarity. The original prosecutor of the International Criminal Court is a close friend of mine, Luis Ocampo, and I've been in touch with him as well. I would hope that the International Criminal Court and the judges who have to approve the warrant would take seriously the jurisdictional limitations that the court has. No court is above the law, and no court is allowed to exceed its statutory or treaty limitations.
I wonder, sir, when it comes to the court, now, of course, we've got Karim Khan is the prosecutor, and he's very much in the limelight with this particular case. Is it fair to simply describe him as anti-Semitic, which has been the case, when considering, you know, he's got a panel of people behind him who are backing this?
No, it's not fair to call him anti-Semitic. I never have. I actually did speak at the invitation of the previous prosecutor, Ocampo, to the entire staff of prosecutorial staff of the ICC in The Hague. And I came away believing that there was a strong bias against Israel at the level of the staff. That doesn't make them anti-Semites, but it does accuse them perhaps of having a double standard when it comes to Israel. We know that the International Criminal Court has been anxious to indict some non-third world country leaders, because the argument is that they only indict African leaders, they only indict leaders from third world countries. Isn't it time to indict leaders from a democratic country? And this may be a kind of affirmative action of leaning over backwards to go after a country with a viable judiciary to show that the International Criminal Court is not only targeting third world countries, but also countries like Israel.
Professor, what's your thought on what will actually come out of this? What is likely to happen? Would we see, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu ever actually facing court or facing jail?
Of course not. Of course not. The United States would refuse to extradite him. I think so would Great Britain, so would France. I don't believe any democratic country that is signatory to the Rome Treaty would actually extradite Netanyahu, and he will not stand trial, and he will not serve time in prison. The ICC is, for people like Radovan Karadzic, the people from the former Yugoslavia, who I actually visited in prison at The Hague. Those are the kinds of people that should be prosecuted, not people who are engaged in self-defense activities, even if you believe that the self-defense activities have gone too far. That's exactly what complementarity was designed to protect against. It's designed to make sure that the ICC is not a court of first resort. It's a court of last resort. It's a court of resort only for countries that don't have the ability or the willingness to investigate their own people. And, in Israel, 4 prime ministers have been prosecuted. 4. Can you name any other country? And a president. I visited one of the prime ministers, Ehud Olmert. I visited him in prison. There's a joke in Israel that says, if you ask for a former prime minister's cell number, it's not his telephone. What can be said better about a country's willingness to investigate its own leaders than the fact that it has prosecuted 4 of its own prime ministers and 1 of its own presidents? Can that be said about almost any other country? Certainly not in the Middle East, and very, very few around the world.
Professor Dershowitz, what does this do to the credibility of the ICC in your eyes then?
Totally destroys it. If they go forward and issue warrants against a democratic country and democratic leaders of a country that is investigating its own people, it will destroy the credibility. It may cause countries to leave the Rome Treaty. I can easily imagine countries like Great Britain and France and Canada and Australia saying, oh my God, does this mean that our generals, our prime ministers will be at risk if we fight ISIS or if we fight Al-Qaeda and there are allegations that we kill too many civilians? We can do our own investigation. So I think if warrants are actually issued, it would, I think, forever destroy the credibility of the court. And the ICC would go down in history along with other international institutions like the League of Nations, which are now in the dustbin of history. If you want the ICC to survive, it must remain within its jurisdictional limits. And if it fails to do that, it will be, its credibility will be destroyed.
Professor Dershowitz, I want to tap into something else, your experience as one of America's most prominent lawyers. You've been witnessing what's been going on at the Donald Trump hush money trial. And I'm wondering what your takeaways are from that case.
Well, I was there yesterday. I was in the courtroom, sitting in the front row, literally just inches away from the star witness of the prosecution, Michael Cohen, as he passed by me and went up to the witness stand. I saw when the judge threatened to strike the testimony of one of the main witnesses for the defense. And I've been in courtrooms all over the world. I've been in courtrooms in France, in England, in China, in Russia, in Israel, all over the world. And what I saw yesterday in the court in New York was a great injustice. Lawyers still can't figure out what the exact crime is. The crime for which he was originally charged has gone beyond the statute of limitations. That is making a false entry, calling something a legal expense when it was in fact recompense for somebody paying the hush money. But that's expired under the statute of limitations. And then you have to create a new crime by saying that his intent behind entering that bookkeeping entry, which he himself didn't do, but his secretary did, was to impact the election. It's a real stretch and a very, very weak case, but it's in Manhattan, where the vast majority of voters and jurors don't want to see Donald Trump be the next president. I am not a political supporter of the Republicans or of Donald Trump. I am a supporter of the Constitution, and I defend the rights of everybody, no matter what country. I've defended the rights of Palestinians. I've defended the rights of terrorists. I've defended the rights of communists. I've defended the rights of Nazis. So I don't pick my clients or people whose causes I support based on partisan or political or ideological considerations. I do it based on the law and based on our Constitution.
So based on the law, sir, in this case, there are a number of possible outcomes. How do you think it might end up?
It's impossible to predict. I tried to look into the eyes of the jurors, and I didn't see very much. I saw them pay a lot of attention when Cohn admitted that he had stolen $60,000 from Trump. But it could be a hung jury. Although when you have a long trial, jurors don't like to think that their work has been in vain. So it may not be a hung jury. It could be a conviction. You need 12, nothing for a conviction. That's a long shot, but it could happen. It could be an acquittal. If you had to bet money, I think you have to bet probably on a hung jury. But a conviction is certainly possible in light of the way the jury was selected in this case.
And I was going to ask that specifically because we see, according to a lot of people, America is more divided along the political lines than ever before. What chance is there that Donald Trump might end up a convicted felon, might end up behind bars?
Not behind bars. I don't think he'll end up behind bars, but it's possible he could end up being a convicted felon. And that might influence some voters, independent voters. But I think it's overwhelmingly likely that if he were convicted, the conviction would be reversed, certainly should be reversed on appeal, because the judge made so many errors.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much.